Hey! Oh, how are you guys doing?
Hello.
Hey, Dave.
Great.
Good,
Hi,
good.
Chris. Hi, Christina.
Oh, Christina, you're mute. You fell for it.
Oh man,
There we go.
what did I do?
uh,
It's not even a Monday,
yeah,
Chris. It's
yeah.
not even a Monday.
It's okay, Dave. She's new. I don't know what to tell you.
I need a brighter red little thing to tell me.
I keep things simple. It's just
Yeah,
AirPods, and that's pretty much it. I can never get that wrong, unless
yeah.
somebody calls me on my phone. Then we're in trouble.
Then that's a dog. That's a area. Well, thank you, Dave, for taking some time to join us today and talk about like one of my favorite topics, semantic models. Dave, I'm not sure everyone knows who you are. Do you want to give people a brief introduction?
Yeah, well, thanks, Chris, for and Christina for having me here. Hi everyone. I'm Dave Mariani. I'm the CTO and co-founder of AtScale. And AtScale is, I would say, the one of the OG semantic layer platforms. Started the company about in 2013, so over 10 years now. And so, we're out to make data available for anyone who wants to get access to it, not just data engineers or people who can write SQL or DAX for that matter.
Oh, that's fantastic. And we're going to get into all of that. I do want to like talk more about where AtScale is today. But I'm a big fan of like always doing a bit of a rewind and like understanding, Dave, how did you get like, and I always think from 5-year-old Dave who wanted to be a firefighter or policeman or how did you make that transition to CTO, like firefighter wanting to be firefighter to CTO at scale? How does that happen?
It's not too far away from, and I never want to be a firefighter, but I did know, back in growing up in Stockton, California, which is a farming community, with parents who never went to college. It was up to me to figure out, and my sisters to figure out like what they were going to do in terms of college. And I come from a retail family, and so Mariani's Men's and Boys Clothing, it's still there in Stockton. So that was, and I just felt all along that wasn't my path. I worked there, all summers. I worked there a couple days a week during school, and I just knew there had to be something more. And I was watching The Price is Right one day, and one of their things they had up for bid was an Apple II Plus, and that was it for me. So I wanted an Apple II Plus, and then I was able to bamboozle my parents into thinking that I was going to use it for homework. Of course, I just wanted to play games, and it didn't do much when you turned it on. So I had to learn Apple Basic, and that was my hobby. Was my hobby in high school was writing code, and when I went to UCLA, I was a economics major because nobody told me that I could be a software engineer. So it just so happened that my first job out of school, it was a consulting firm, and so it was, and they saw on my resume that my hobby was writing Basic, and they're like, "You can write code?" It's like, "Well, it's my hobby." And it's like, "Well, you're hired." And all of a sudden, we turned that consulting firm into a software company. We sold it to Oracle, and I started my first company and have never looked back. So I have absolutely zero credentials when it comes to software engineering. I'm a hack, but I love it, and I'm doing I'm doing what I love, Chris.
Oh, that is absolutely fantastic. And so we're about to get into let's get to the topic at hand. First, also welcome everyone who's joined us on the live stream. Glad to have you here. If you had, what was it, an Apple IIe? Did you say, Dave?
2 plus.
Two
2,
plus.
2 plus became before the E, Chris. Come
Oh
on.
my.
Come
Okay.
on.
Sorry. I did not have an Apple 2 plus. So If you have an Apple II Plus, let us know in the chats and the comments. And while we're going to be here having a conversation, we do want you to be part of the conversation as well. So, along those lines, if you have questions for Dave or for me or for Christina, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Prefix them with a Q so we can get them queued up to ask those questions. We do ask that you please don't spam or repeat questions. Let's keep this civil and sane here, so that we can just keep this conversation up and running. Okay. And with that, we're going to grab our preferred beverage of the day, and we are going to take a sip, and then we'll dive into our lunch and learn. So let's go.
Cheers.
All right. So Dave, semantic models. Can we first cover, just for broad awareness, what the heck a semantic model is and how you got to your passion for semantic models?
Well, it's semantic models have been around since really the beginning of OLAP. So we're talking about late 80s, 90s, and the concept of a business layer that sits on top of the physical technical data is really what a semantic layer is. So OLAP sort of invented the whole idea of the measures and dimensions, this sort of like business-friendly way of describing data. And you have drill downs and hierarchies, things that, when people and business people think of data, they think of the I'm dealing with the month that's going to roll up into a quarter, that's going to roll up into my fiscal year. They think that I'm in a business unit that rolls up into a region, that rolls up into an organization. So they think in terms of hierarchical and in terms of multidimensional sort of the ways of thinking. And so the semantic layer was really coined, or business objects probably coined the business objects universe, which was sort of the first concept of, okay, calling out this separate thing. And so it's been embedded. And so semantic layers have been along for decades, but they've always been tightly coupled to the consumption. Yep. to the method of consumption. So business objects had their semantic layer. SSAS has their semantic layer. Cognos had their semantic layer. MicroStrategy. I can go on and on. And so really where I came down to it is like, gosh, having worked at Yahoo, and this is back in 2010 to 2012, I was running analytics and running our data teams, and every business had their own BI tool. I mean, and because it was, before I got there, it was every business unit for themselves. So, right. So search had MicroStrategy, and display had ClickView, and we had Tableau, and we had Excel. So we had one of everything. And so what I struggled with, Chris and Christina, was the fact that I ended up just creating extracts for each one of these different sort of endpoints, semantic layers, like all day long. And it took hundreds of people to do this. And at the end of the day, after I delivered these business units their data, they all came up with their own calculations of what a click was, or what an impression was. And, David Philo and Jerry Yang, the founders, would fry my butt because it was my fault, even though that last mile was being controlled by the business. And the business didn't want to do that. They weren't doing anything wrong, but they did what they had to do, right? And so what I wanted was, why can't I have a universal semantic layer? Why can't I extract that from these tools and then have it be this layer where I could provide that to all these business teams, and then they could do what they do best, which is create visualizations to improve customer experience and make money for the business.
I mean, that's such a universal need, right? Like it's not something that is unique to Amazon and big businesses, right? Like that's every company is dealing with that same problem, right?
Yeah, and it's it's kind of frustrating because it's this, we have the same issues today, and we tried to solve it. Where Tableau really pioneered this sort of the self-service sort of motion. Let's let the business do it all on their own. And you know what? It's like I've seen that that play out at Yahoo. And the result was that the business, they get started and they're like, this is wonderful. And then all of a sudden it starts to build on itself and like gets harder and harder for them to maintain. And then it's like there's a whole bunch of extra work being done. And at the end of the day, nobody trusts the data.
Yep.
Because Yahoo front page is saying we had this many impressions, which there's no way that could be true because Yahoo Business or Yahoo Finance is saying they got more. But wait a minute, they had to come through front page before they got to finance. So how could that be? Because they counted it differently. Because they calculated it differently. Because they started collecting it earlier in the day. Because finance is doing unique clicks or unique impressions versus total impressions for front page. So there's all this sort of business speak that gets mixed up, and then at the end of the day, people don't trust the data, and they're not able to collaborate on the data to actually really make real impact to the business and to customers.
Well, and
It's kind of like they're not comparing apples to oranges. They're comparing apples from 3 different orchards, right?
Ooh.
Like they look the same, but they're different.
Yeah.
Ooh, I love that, Christina. That's a great one. I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
I'll give you credit. But that's exactly what happens. And it's not just that. It's not just the trust of that. That's a lot. And the Tableau self-service revolution. What it did is it ended up empowering businesses to get away from that central data team and freeing them, which is good. But it created a lot of chaos and a lot of redundant work. And it also forced the business to understand schemas and to understand SQL and databases and database tuning. These are all the things we don't want the business to do. And they do reluctantly because they want to have the freedom to be able to create their own analytics. And so my goal was just to try to deliver the best of both worlds. Have some that central data team, have them provide a service, have the business be able to collaborate on what the right business metrics are and what those definitions were, and then let them use the tool they want to use. Because look, my MicroStrategy users, I mean, they weren't going to learn a new tool. Well, they might learn Tableau, but there's no way I can make my Tableau users go back to MicroStrategy. There was just no way I was going to do that. So my realization at Yahoo was that changing habits is really hard. So introducing a whole nother visualization tool with its own semantic layer, for the sake of, this is going to be easier and we'll be able to consolidate on that, bull. Because at the end of the day, it's like it's just going to be another tool in the tool shed, and it's not gonna force people to adopt that tool.
Well, and I think the big challenges with a lot of these tools is it forces the business to spend more and more time talking about data when the business wants to be talking about what's going on in their business. And that's not a value add proposition, right? Like you don't need to have the regional sales manager or the assistant to the regional sales manager just talking about data loads and when they pulled their data last and some crazy understanding of what a dimensional model is, right?
Yeah, and you know what? It's like it's exactly right, Chris. And it's like we do force the business to know too much about how the data is made, and that does distract them. Or you go the opposite way and they get really dumb dashboards. And that's so they have this sort of surface layer into what's happening because that's all they can really get access to, and that's all they know how to do. And one more point, Excel. It's like I know IT always hates Excel. Excel is the number one BI tool on the planet. It will continue to be the number one BI tool on the planet. And you could trade it out for Google Sheets, but it's a spreadsheet. And all data lands in a spreadsheet. Why? because it's rows and columns, it's cells. It's like a multi-dimensional cube, isn't it? That's what it is, right? It's the materialization of a cube. And so even if you start in Tableau or MicroStrategy or Power BI, the data still ends up in Excel where it gets that last mile of manipulation. And so what we said is like, for the universal semantic layer to truly be universal, it needs to be able to talk to everything, including Excel. And not Excel as a data dump, Excel as a live interaction. Because what IT hates about Excel is that people dump data into Excel and they create spread marts, and it lives and has its own sort of life to itself and life cycle, and that data walks around, which is scary for IT. And the business hates it because they got to keep it in sync. And so you remember, like, you got to copy and paste all your data into this little section, and then you have formulas off of that little section. It's a freaking nightmare. And so, but ultimately, people do it because
computer crashes 10 times. Yeah.
Yes, or a million rows. Forget about it. If you can load a million rows, good luck on that. You have a pretty hefty PC there.
Well, and how many copies of the data are you going to have, right? Like I've been at places where log in, we need to consolidate. We've got 900 processes that produce spreadsheets on a daily basis, and we keep those copies of those databases for those spreadsheets for 7 years. Like, I mean, off the top of my head, I can't that's so much. I can't even begin to do the math without breaking out a calculator, right? They've got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of spreadsheets that they're trying to say this is their consumption pattern that they're going to use for auditing purpose. I mean, it's crazy, right?
And Chris, so what Microsoft did really right, and so at Yahoo, I was looking for that semantic layer, and the closest thing I could get to it was SSAS.
Yeah.
And so for the advertising business, the display advertising business, we built a 24 terabyte SSAS cube, and that was just with 90 days worth of data. So we would load 3.5 billion rows a day, because that's 3.5 billion ad impressions a day. So and the biggest I could get it was for 90 days, and the business loved it, and they created millions and millions of dollars of lift that they calculated based on that model. The problem is that they couldn't do year over year or quarter over quarter comparisons because I was only limited to 90 days. So, but what it did is, by providing that live Excel access, man, that was gold. And so I knew that, when I started AtScale, it's like, I got to have that same level of integration, but I just got to break the boundaries of when you build a cube and you physically compute it all at once, there are limits when it comes to how many dimensions, measures, intersections, the cardinality that. And I saw that at Yahoo, who had big data. And my interpretation was, my prediction was that everybody's going to be like a Yahoo in a few years, because we were inventing Hadoop, and it's like, okay, it's going to be almost free to capture and store data. I gotta believe Hadoop was a failure, and so I was wrong there. But the concept of a data lake was not, and so we see that today. But that was really,
detaching, storage, which can be incredibly cheap, from where you have your compute layer, your consumption layer, so that you can have literally all the data, right? Like every company can have all of the data, right? Like all of it, and it's not a problem anymore, right?
So Chris, and this came from Jerry Yang. He says we don't throw data away. And that was our guiding principle at Yahoo, was we don't throw data away. And that's where Hadoop really came out of, because we were an Oracle shop, and you can imagine we did Oracle RAC, trying to scale that thing out, and it was just we couldn't do it. And so we were throwing data away because the data was sitting in logs archived somewhere. And the business really wanted to be able to query that data and use it to make decisions, and we couldn't do it. So we invented Hadoop, which was a better way of capturing it, but not really great for querying it. And that's where sort of I wanted to put that semantic layer on Hadoop, which was our first sort of step. in going to market was putting the semantic layer on Hadoop. And then we quickly saw that tools like Snowflake and Databricks and BigQuery and Redshift were sort of becoming the preferred way of storing data. So we made sure our semantic layer could talk to those platforms as well.
Well, and I mean, isn't that's one of the big keys of asemantic layers? You have to be able to connect to data wherever it happens to exist within your organization, and you have to be flexible about new platforms, new tech that's coming on board, and be able to connect to that and use that as well. So,
It's an enormous problem because you got to connect to everything, and everything's got to connect to you. And so it's a really big integration issue. But there's one more sort of element that makes it hard as well for a universal semantic layer, and it's in managing performance. So if you don't deliver performance that's as good or close to as good as import mode for a BI tool, so Tableau has extracts, Power BI has import mode. And so why do they have those? Because business users demand speed of thought kind of queries. And so if your semantic layer just passes through queries to Snowflake and it delivers you SQL level performance, then you're going to go right back to import mode or creating data extracts, which creates copies, which completely defeats the universal semantic layer. So a universal semantic layer without performance management is game over. It's useless. So you got to connect everything to everything, and it's got to be as fast or faster than the native tool's performance. So there you go.
Sounds easy.
Yeah, simple.
Well,
I love hard things. Apparently,
we'll take this as a cue, an opportunity to plug. We're going to be doing another event next week, right, Dave? Kind of excited about this opportunity for us to talk live about Power BI on Fabric, marketing our real semantic layer solution. So, do you want to tell the audience about this event?
Yeah, Microsoft came out. What was it, like 8 months ago, Chris, with this Power BI and Direct Lake on Microsoft Fabric. There's a lot of terms around there. There's Microsoft Fabric. There's One Lake, which is in Microsoft Fabric, and there's Direct Lake, which is a Power BI interface into One Lake. In any case, a lot of people are really interested in, wow, can I really avoid import mode on Power BI and tap straight into my data, in my raw data? And so Microsoft with Fabric came out with this solution called Direct Lake that is the goal is to do just that. And so Chris, I went and ran a TPC DS benchmark. TPC Council has a benchmark. DS is decision support. It's a common way for sort of measuring the scalability and performance of certain platforms. And so we conducted a study, and we found some interesting things. So I want to talk to you about that. You know everything about Power BI. So it's going to be a really great sort of discussion and debate. And I want you to really challenge my methodology. I want you to challenge my findings. And so it should be a fun conversation, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm looking forward to it. I know Microsoft doesn't participate in these things, but we'll talk about this more. I want to see how this plays out and works because I like the semantic layer. I want to understand what my opportunities are for how we can properly build and work in this space. So, should be a good conversation. I can't wait to see your tests and how you conducted them. So.
Yeah, and Power BI has become the number one consumption tool when it comes to analytics. So it's enormously popular, and just through our partners, we can see that in terms of consumption on their clouds, and it's really taken the world by storm. Tableau was the king, and Power BI is really the new king of the next generation. So I think it's a lot of people are watching that and would get a lot out of it.
Sure. And I mean, you said you compared it to Snowflake, right? And I mean,
So we did just a raw set of benchmarks on scalability performance over 100 gigs of data, 1 terabyte of data, and 10 terabytes of data.
mm,
So we're taking it through the different scales of data sizes. And then we also compared it to AtScale on Snowflake. So leaving the data in Snowflake versus moving it to OneLake, and comparing those numbers. So we're going to do a pretty comprehensive view and with real business queries. It's some fascinating sort of results, and I'm looking forward to talking with the audience and with you about them.
I'm excited to see it, and there's going to be clients out there that won't. I mean, regardless of the results, they're not going to abandon Snowflake tomorrow. So, like, knowing how this work and operates, I think is valid to understand how it goes. Now, there's a good recap of semantic modeling, and but I think we have some controversial topics that me and you have to get into a little bit of a religious debate. But before we enter like the Thunderdome of semantic model conversations, we do have a question from Johnny Winter, and I wanted to make sure that we brought this up. He says, Dave, is MDX making a comeback? Is that
Hey, Johnny. No, MDX is dead and gone, and it's now DAX. So MDX has put on a new coat, and that new coat is DAX, is what I'd argue.
Okay.
And the purpose of MDX and DAX, so MDX was, of course, the multi-dimensional expression language that was popularized by SQL Server Analysis Services. If you look at Power BI is now sort of a shell around, it's a very nice, pretty shell around SSAS. So ultimately, the SSAS engine is behind Power BI Premium, and it powers that experience. And when they moved to Vertipack, which is in memory, so they moved from a multi-dimensional model to a tabular model, they introduced the DAX language. But as far as I'm concerned, DAX is just another way of doing cell level calculations, which is beautiful, right? Because I would argue that everybody thinks in terms of relational today. We forgot about how powerful OLAP is. But again, back to that Excel example. Why do you use Excel? Because you need to do cell level calculations. It's really powerful. And to me,
Right.
DAX allows you to do those cell level calculations, but over relational data. And so DAX is the new MDX.
Excellent.
Here to hear, folks. Yeah.
I would agree that does make good sense. Okay, so a controversial topic. One of the things that's out there that exists that I rail about all of the time is, and I'm going to call out Matillion. I've spoken with their marketing director. I hate this phrase. They say ETL is dead. Long live ELT. And my contention is there's never any such thing as uh, ELT. It's always ETL. You just have to change where the L is, and so I think there should always be a layer that we should plan and manage for the loading and the calculation of data. And I would contend that should never be at the semantic layer. That should always be at a lower layer within my data processing. What do you say to that? And
Well, so I definitely agree that you can never get rid of. I don't care if you call it ETL or ELT; it doesn't really matter to me. I'm with you on that, and you can't get rid of that. There are cases where you have to be able to clean data, and to clean data, you need to be able to materialize it. And and it doesn't make sense to try to reproduce that logic at query time over and over again because it's inefficient. But what I would say, Chris, is that there are cases where the semantic layer can take the place of physical transformations to give the modeler the ability to create calculations in the semantic layer without having to go back to their data engineers to materialize it. Now, I know what you're going to say, right? It's like, because you're thinking about If I have to make the modeler write DAX, no way, Dave. There's no way I'm going to make them write DAX. But we have a different approach. So would you mind if I shared my screen
I do want
to show
to
you?
get over to that 100%. We're going to go that. So get your screen ready. There was just a comment on that, like, and I apologize. I know that my viewers are not necessarily all like wonks in this space, and so ETL, extract, transform, and load, has been the classical process when it comes to loading data from a source system. And when storage wasn't cheap, when storage was very, very expensive, that data would get extracted, and the tool would do all sorts of transformations, uh, in flight, then only load the calculated or that distilled information that was necessary for the storage layer. With the advent of cloud computing, where storage is really inexpensive, the thought was like, oh, we'll just go to ELT, which is extract, load as it is, and then just do a transform on top of that raw data. And that's where we're having a debate on this. And so Dave's going to show us how and why AtScale has a better solution for loading and for that final layer that doesn't require to be transformed and loaded at within the data warehouse.
So,
right,
Chris,
Dave?
just a little bit, yes, and a little bit more definition before we get there, right? So, there's a lot of people, especially Databricks, talks about the medallion architecture.
Yep.
And the medallion architecture, they're saying that there is bronze, silver, and then gold data. And the bronze data is the raw data in its ugly form.
Yep.
The silver data has been cleaned and sort of normalized a little bit. And then the gold data is basically the fit for consumption. It's the reporting tables. Okay. And so it's meant to be the place where people hook in their Tableau or Power BI dashboards. And so what I would say is, like, that gold layer, that if with a semantic layer that does it right, you don't necessarily have to build that gold layer. Not saying you have to have bronze and silver, but in our customers tap into the silver layer, and they use the semantic layer to be able to construct that gold layer without having to add a bunch of other tables and additional sort of data engineering tasks that are gonna change because the business requirements are gonna change. And so my argument for having that gold layer be in a semantic layer is that it needs to respond to the business. And you know what? Bronze and silver, that stuff ain't going to change very much, because you would have to change your base systems for that to change. But that reporting layer is subject to change based on business requirements. And to me, Chris, I think you need more flexibility and agility. And that's where I think the semantic layer can help. Can I show you?
Yes. I would love to see your side of it and see what you
Okay.
Let me know when you're ready to share.
I am ready to share. Okay. So can you see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay. So what you're seeing here, and you're going to find out a lot more about this if you check in next week, is the TPCDS model on Snowflake. So you can see that in blue, these are the fact tables. So I have data like store sales and catalog sales and the like. So I have all these different stuff. And then I have, in the greens are what we call our dimensions, and then grays here they're also dimensions. We call them degenerate dimensions, because they're not physical dimension tables. Okay, so what do I mean? So you can see that there's some sales price tiers and catalog price tiers and stuff and the like. So Chris, the way that this is a case where I want to stratify my sales into different buckets. So I can, for example, say that, well, my gold customers, bad word, because my best customers, spend $100 a month with us. So I want to identify them because they spend $100, and then my next best customers, et cetera, et cetera. So if I go and I look at this data here, and I go and look at this dimension, this sales price dimension, you can see that I have what we call, in AtScale, we call this a data set. This store sales, that's just my raw data. So I'm going to double click on that. And this is my raw data that I have, not my raw data, this is my silver data that I have in Snowflake in this case. And so these were all just different data fields. But what I did is I created some virtual data fields over here. So the virtual data fields are the sales price tier. And so let's just look at that. Well, that is just a formula, Chris. So you can see that I'm looking at my sales price and I'm stratifying it into these different buckets. So that is a snippet of Snowflake SQL. So I could have embedded that into an ETL job or an ELT job, right? But if I want to change those categories, I want to change those tiers, all I need to do in the semantic layer is change it here, and everybody will get the updated definition. And they're not having to, and so, yes, I could build this into a column, but what it does, Chris, is it makes that table wider, which means it's going to take up more blocks, which means less is going to fit in memory, which means it's going to ultimately impact my performance. So by making this in the AtScale semantic layer, this calculation is done at query time, which adds virtually zero extra computation, but it allows me to have the flexibility of allowing people to access these different attributes. And you can see there's my different, this is what the end user will see. And you can see there's my store attributes, and you can see there's that return times tier. This is how they show up. So users can just pick those. It's going to generate that. It's going to push that query snippet into Snowflake and let it do its computation on the fly. Now, I'm not done yet, because that works well when you have it in line with the query. But what about DAX and the like? What about a ratio, for example? Well, for those, you still have to do a post-query calculation. So here's an average catalog unit net profit. And you can see this is just a ratio. So we also allow you to do NBX or DAX, Chris. So you can do those post-query calculations. But what you're used to with Power BI is that everything has to be a DAX calculation, which means you have to understand DAX. But what we said is that there's two types of calculation. There's sort of an inline calculation, which could just be done in the native SQL language of the platform you're talking to. And of course, then there could be sort of a post-query calculation, which you could do with what we call a calculated metric. So that's kind of how we give you the best of both worlds. So don't disagree with you on materialization. Of course, look at all these store sales needs to be materialized. I'm just saying you can have your cake and eat it too, because you don't need to. You can create calculations on top of your raw data, and we'll translate those and pass those through to Snowflake in this case.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe we're just and this is a valid separation, but that's just SQL. The first one you're talking about is SQL that sits on top of it.
Yep.
Explain to me why that can't be a view that I persist in my lake or in my warehouse instead of that. And maybe I build out a data ops. My preference is that's something that you build out into a data ops pipeline. That especially a view that, well, frankly, like you could swap those out on the fly. You don't need to have like as rigorous of controls around as you do the back end for bronze or silver layer. But a view that sits on gold, you should have a data pipeline that allows for people to go in and implement it so that it exists there for common use versus at the semantic layer.
Okay. So this is philosophy. So there's no wrong answer here. There's no wrong answer here. But what I'm going to say is that what I wanted at Yahoo is that I didn't want to be in the business, Chris, of doing this crap, honestly. I didn't
Sure.
want to be in the business. To me, this is business logic, right?
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so what I wanted is like, I wanted to, so I think that the semantic modeling is a business function. And so I want the business to do what they need to do in terms of, and of course it has to be governed. And
Mhm.
so, and we have a library. So these are all in a library. So they can be governed by a central data team if you want.
Mhm.
So it doesn't have to be, the Wild West. But I wanted that gold layer, that reporting layer, I wanted that to be managed and controlled by the business. So I could get out of the business of having to respond to the business when they say, you know what, I don't want this net profit here. I want to, you know what, I want to break down this. Can you go and break down this? Oh yeah, well, let me file a JIRA ticket, and I'll have that to you in about 2 weeks after it goes through QA, because we got to then go update all our schemas by adding new columns. And no, it's like I wanted to have the flexibility, leave the flexibility with the business to be able to change this business logic, and then separate the worlds between
Mhm.
the physical data pipelines and what this is. I would call this a logical data pipeline, Chris. I don't know.
Oh, so you're saying okay. So I like that conceptual, like, hey, this is I like the concept of a physical and a logical pipeline. I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I am going to 100% agree to you that and agree. It's why I said this is like a religious debate, because I
Mm-hmm.
am not certain that it is possible to prove one of us correct or wrong on this. So and I like the concept, and in fact I insist upon the concept of the business should own this layer of what the logic is, and that is something that is critical to them. I guess my challenge is, like, should that be is it a function of the lake house or warehouse, or is it a function of the semantic layer and
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
privileges that we get there, right?
and Chris is like, I'm lazy. I'm a lazy engineer, and I would
Mhm.
argue that
Best ones
I
are.
like I like lazy engineers, because lazy engineers try to automate their work away, so they can
Yeah.
spend more time playing games or whatever. And so for me at Yahoo, it's like I just like, if I have to have another conversation with somebody in Yahoo Sports who is trying to explain to me what they want, and I have no idea. I don't understand what Yahoo Sports wants to do with the data. I really don't. And so I don't want to have to be everything to everyone and have to understand the business at the depth that they understand the business, because I'll never be able to do this. So I wanted the semantic layer to be able to put that in their hands so that they could apply their domain knowledge about Yahoo Sports, with a clean data set that I can trust is right.
Hmm.
And knowing that the logical, look, if they make a mistake in the logical semantic layer and the logical pipeline, well, that's on them, right?
Yep.
It's not on me. And I hate to say that. That sounds pretty negative, but hey, that's the way the world works, right? It's like a separation of powers and the separation of church and state.
So I like that. I like what you're saying there, and I especially like the concept of separating out capabilities and powers. Um, and I'm going to toss in my other question or challenge here is when I think of data, I think of data in tiers, and
Mm-hmm.
I think of enterprise data, I think of department data, I think of team data, and then I think of individual data. Now,
Yep.
the reason for me pressing or saying I think people should be empowered to be able to create and manage items inside of a gold space is
Mm-hmm.
because it goes, it started with, hey, they need a place to be able to hold that logical data flow that we're talking about. But
Yeah.
I also think that they need the ability to augment data that doesn't necessarily come from the enterprise, right? Like
Yeah.
I've always classically said, like the holiday party, what customers attended the holiday party.
Mm-hmm.
That might be a big deal for a team or a department, but the enterprise probably doesn't care, right?
Mm-hmm.
how and where? So my contention is the data warehouse or lakehouse side is where that should happen. Um, in the semantic layer, let's say we go down the path of the semantic layer. How and where does that fit in your mind or in with that scale?
Yeah, look, it's when I started the business, my whole
Mhm.
dream was like everybody is going to use a semantic layer, and that's going to be the only path to get to any kind of data. That's unrealistic, honestly,
Mhm.
because and we do have a data science interface. By the way, we support multiple dialects, including Python, so you can access the semantic layer in Jupyter notebooks to build and train your models. So yes, you got to have all the different interfaces. But to think that people are only going to interact with data through that form and through the semantic layer is unrealistic. So I'm not saying that there's no other paths to data. But what I am saying is that for the vast majority of people, and I'm talking about that Excel spreadsheet user
Mhm.
who they don't have a connection to the lake house.
Yeah.
I'm just like, when we talk about democratizing data access, I'm talking about that person. I'm talking about
Okay.
the person who lives in Excel, and I'm not talking about the person who knows SQL and has a database connection and knows enough to get themselves in trouble or do it themselves. I mean, God bless them, and you're not going to shut that off. No way.
Right.
But that can't be the path to getting access to business friendly data. I think you got to have that business friendly data. And to me, that's where the semantic layer and the semantic model shines. Is it by making data truly approachable for everyone?
Okay, so your contention would be you would still need an engineer to augment or add an additional data source. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. That data engineering does not go away.
Mhm.
It's more important than ever. But I'm saying is that can be a slower what's the word? That can be not a slower process, but it can be. It's the semantic layer is where you're going to get the most demand to change things the quickest, right?
Mhm.
Versus the data pipelines are going to be slowly changing. Ooh, I'm going to use some Kimball stuff here. So it's a slowly changing dimension versus a rapidly changing dimension. So I think that the data pipeline side, the physical data pipeline, can morph and be on a different cadence than
Mhm.
the semantic layer, which has to respond to business at business's speed,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that does make sense. So your contention is they still need some layer and area at the back end system to be able to do some of those functions for categories of work. It doesn't all fit into the uh it doesn't all fit into the semantic layer, and I like that. What boundaries do you put on what's a semantic layer piece of functionality and what's not?
That's a great question. I was just going to get there.
Okay.
I was going to say, look, that yeah, there's cases where if something's not going to change,
Mhm.
materialize it for God's sakes.
Mhm.
Make everybody's job easier, right? Why not?
Yeah.
So I'm not. So I'm saying that the things that go into semantic layer are the things that are business oriented, that are likely to change, and that are going to change rapidly. And so that gives the freedom to the business again to do their own sort of make their own sort of in their own domain, create their own metrics and dimensions and the like to satisfy their own use cases on their own calendar. So it's up to them. They can go as fast as or slow as they want. But ultimately, if something is not going to be subject to change or subject to, even if it's morphed, you can still derive from a physical field and then do more things with it. So it's so if you can materialize, for God's sakes, materialize, and because it's going to be better. But to go the other direction and say that you're going to materialize every single column in calculation, then you're getting into was a
Mhm.
the big fat table thing. Is it
Yeah,
Yeah.
the one big
yeah,
table or
BFT or
BFT or yeah,
one big table,
yeah,
one big table
yeah.
kind of
Okay.
thing.
I like the fat
And
table.
that's like yeah, it's usually fat, not that long, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And so yeah, one big table. That puts pressure on your data platforms, and it also makes your ETL more fragile because now you have bigger tables that you need to alter. and snapshot and do all those kind of crazy things. And if you're now you're adding additional columns, and every single time you want more data, you're adding another column. You're doing a schema change. Man, I mean, data engineers hate that.
And rightfully so. And I think one of the big challenges in the cloud is we went from using relational databases that ran in Oracle or SQL or DB2, and where you'd have materialize, foreign key relationships where you could run queries, and those joins, no matter how big they were, it was incredibly fast and easy to do. Where now, when we think about the data not being necessarily in a database anymore, it's in a Parquet file, or it's in a Delta file, or it's just a CSV or whatever. Now that searching, the hunting, those joins become much more expensive to perform when we run queries on our backends. So,
and they're prohibitive. Joins are prohibitive, honestly, in any kind of large scale data. So I'll give you a little hint about what we do for performance wise, at least on the AtScale semantic layer. What we do is, guess what we do? We flatten it out in the form of aggregates. So based on the kinds, what people are asking for in terms of dimensions and measures, so based on what they're asking for, we have an internal graph that matches. We know all the nodes are. And what we end up doing is that we end up creating a table in the data platform, let's say Snowflake, for example, or Databricks, whatever. And that table flattens it all out. So what we've done is, like, we've gotten rid of the joins, which is because we know that those data platforms hate joins. So guess what? We're going to make it really easy for you. So we'll create maybe that one big table, that big fat table, but we're going to do that on the fly for combinations of metrics and dimensions only when necessary. And we'll do that. So we're doing that ETL. Honestly, we're materializing, Chris. So yes, we are. I'm not going to be a liar here, but we materialize when needed.
Chris is like, I've been sifting so long. Finally found
it was there. There's the load.
Yes, but there's no data engineer behind that load. It's the machine. It's AI.
All right, fair enough. That is my big thing. It's like there's a load at the end, even if it's cached, even if it's someplace it's going on. So, and I don't want to. I want to make sure that we touch on and this Enterprise AR brought this up. I am a big no DAX columns individual. I'm wearing my no DAX columns T-shirt. I think that they are. I think calculated columns like this should never should be eliminated from the service. They should all be moved down to the lower layer. I think this kind of plays into a conversation specifically from your perspective. Why would that be the wrong strategy for that, to move out of the business semantic layer and move down into a data engineering layer owned by the business?
Well, look, and this is a difference between, I would say, Microsoft and Microsoft's approach and AtScale's approach. Like, I do think that DAX is hard. Look, I still can't write MDX or DAX. I mean, I got to Google it every time. Yeah. And I should know this stuff, right? It's like, we use it to do all our work. I should know this like back of my hand. It's hard. And so, Chris, I agree with you that, we shouldn't force people to use those tools to model. And to me, that's where, so I have two answers to that. Number one, not everything has to be DAX. And in AtScale, I just showed you that we separated the concepts of, I need to have a calculated column, which is in SQL, versus a cell level calculation, which is post query, which could be in MDX or DAX. And to me, those things are much less common, and doing a ratio is pretty darn simple, right? Versus trying to create that calculation in DAX, which I showed you for that sales tier. It seems pretty simple, but the DAX would probably be about that big. And I don't know how to do it. And so to force people to have to do that, I think that's asking a lot. So my answer is that, DAX, we're trading DAX is more complicated than SQL. I think anybody would agree with that. I mean, it's like it's much more complicated. It's much more powerful than SQL. And so what we would do is we would say, let's have a library of those DAX expressions that are complicated. Let's let somebody who really knows how to do DAX and share those with those of us, including me, who are not so good at it. And so at the end of the day, I know it's a net profit ratio. And I can just include that in my semantic model, Chris, not even understanding what the DAX is behind that. And so the model builder, the semantic model builder, by using a library and reusing calculations, it doesn't force every modeler to have to reinvent the wheel and reinvent the DAX wheel every single time they want to include net profit tier or net profit ratio in one of their semantic models. Reuse. That's my get out of jail free card for you.
Well, and yes, I want it reusable. My contention is that it should be at the lower engineered layer for more reusability and flexibility when it comes to access, consumption, how you want to manage that. But I like the idea of it being in a catalog of business calculated columns that people could define, access, look up, manage, and
govern.
say govern, and say, what, I don't want the employee PIP program calculated column to be generally accessible because I'd get sued, right? Nor do I want people to necessarily be able to go and look at it. So if they're doing a TikTok of me firing them, I don't want them pulling up the the logic I used, right, to outline why they were being terminated, right?
Absolutely. and then that's really, I mean, that's really it's really important for the semantic model to have that level of governance and shareability and ownership, right? So what we see is like there are domains. Domains is like sales, marketing, finance. They have their own sort of metrics and things they share internally, and they may share some of that back with other teams, but they still have the domain over those objects, over those calculations, the conform dimensions, what have you. And there may be maybe there's a central center of excellence that says, you know what, everybody's gonna use gross margin, and this is gonna be it. And if I see any gross margin that's different from this, I'm not going to approve your pull request to deploy your model. So there's all kinds of ways of doing it, but I think that I like the rope. I like give your customers a lot of rope, even though they may hang themselves. But give them the rope, and then you can always sort of pull back where you need to pull back if you need to prevent them from hanging themselves every single time.
All right. Well, I honestly, I think that is a fantastic agreement point we can get to with this. And I'm going to let Dave, you had the last word on that, and we will let that stand. Before we sign off, I'm going to do one last push. Honestly, I'm very excited to talk to you about this. I know this must have taken you a great deal of time, so I'm interested in this conversation and finding out about everything you did there. So please, people, if you have an opportunity, this is next week. This starts literally, it's next Wednesday. It's right after this live stream. So like, I'm going to go live from this. I cut over to that. And so make sure that you join there and check that out. It's going to be a great conversation. Really looking forward to that. Dave,
Really,
any last questions
too,
or comments before we go?
No, I just was like glancing over the chat, and yes, I don't have to Google DAX. I can use ChatGPT, and I have done that. I have GPT-4. So yes, I'm sorry for that old school comment. You're absolutely right.
Oh, we got old so fast. Huh?
Yeah. Look at all that gray. All righty. Well.
All right,
Chris and Christina, you guys are awesome. Appreciate you having me on your show.
Thanks for coming. This was great.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Have a great day, everybody.
Yeah, have a good one, everybody. Peace.
Bye-bye.
Baker Tilly Digital combines strategic industry insight and advanced technical expertise to uncover and solve your digital transformation challenges. If you're interested in learning more, check out our website at bakertilly.com/digital.